She led out the funeral procession despite the warnings from the Secret Service agents. Hi, I'm Jess Cannell. Welcome to my channel, where currently we are going through Maureen Callahan's book, Ask Not, the stories of the Kennedys and the women they destroyed. At the same time, when I come across interesting things, I want to share them with you. And I went through some local antique shops yesterday and I found this printing of Life magazine, December 6th, 1963. The edition that goes through, it says, Mrs. Kennedy, Caroline, and John Jr. wait to join procession to Capitol. And it has him in his little blue suit. You see her face, so distraught. And so I just thought we could go through this together. I also have another book called The Torch is Passed. And in this book, it is the official printing of all the photographs from the procession and the passing from JFK to LBJ. So I thought we'll at least get through this. We might get through that as well. When I open up, the first words on the editor's note say, Caroline said, I only cried twice. The editor's note talks about Evelyn Lincoln, his personal secretary, and his items being carried out, how the president would get daily massages by the swimming pool for his back. It says, Caroline attended the classes, but she disappeared during the play periods. To one of her classmates, she made a single quiet comment on her father's death. I only cried twice. It has a whole section called The 72 Hours and what they teach us, talking about the correlations between the Lincoln assassination and the Kennedy one. It says window shopping at Max Factor. And so it has all sorts of advertisements. I hope y'all don't mind that I show that as well. I just think it's really sweet to the time that here we are 61 years later. And then it says, President Kennedy laid to rest. And it shows the horse that pulled the carriage, like Mrs. Kennedy decided would happen. So I will try to hold this up for y'all. There's the horse-drawn carriage. Here is the image of the coffin with the flag draped over it. Here's the opening paragraph. A woman knelt and gently kissed the flag. A little girl's hand tenderly fumbled under the flag to reach closer. Thus, in a privacy open to all the world, John F. Kennedy's wife and daughter touched at a barrier that no mortal ever can pass again. That's quite poignant. It shows his coffin lying in state there in the great rotunda of our nation's capital. You can see the flag draped coffin lit and the guard around it, the guardsmen. It's a very dark photo. It shows his coffin going up the Capitol steps. Jackie had, we learned in the last episode, thought through and designed these moments. Here we have some of the main players in our book that we've been reading. We have right here the main three. Teddy Kennedy is closest to me, Jackie there in the middle, and then Bobby to the side. Jackie specifically designed her veil. She said she wanted it to be darker, but where she could still be seen. She didn't want it to be opaque. She didn't want it to be completely transparent. Here we have the horse-drawn carriage being pulled out in front of the Lincoln Memorial back behind, of the Washington Memorial there as well. It says, homage from the great. As taps was sounded, President de Gaulle and Emperor Haile Selassie, I don't know if I'm saying that right, saluted the grave. Behind Selassie is German Chancellor Erhard. To the right of Selassie is Philippine President Makabakal. South Korean President Chung Hee Park was there. And then it shows his coffin going to the resting place in Arlington. Here is the horse-drawn carriage being pulled in the National Cemetery. We have a young boy in Chicago weeping as he holds a candle, giving the mood of the country. This is interesting. This goes right along with what we read. It says, Mrs. Kennedy's decisions shaped all the solemn pageantry. So that's very fascinating. This whole article must be about that. It says, throughout her long ordeal, Jacqueline Kennedy's only recorded cry of pain was the, "Oh no," she uttered as her husband was hit. From that moment on, she seemed to draw strength from the events that had engulfed her, until finally she imparted strength to others. So it talks about her planning, her thinking about bagpipers, about the Irish Guard, about the singing of Ave Maria at their wedding. So she's recalling all the things that Jack loved and putting them into this moment. And then we have pictures of the new chief moves boldly to his big tasks. And we have LBJ there greeting and meeting with each of the well-wishers at the funeral and those who came to mourn from around the world. It created a time when he could meet with those people. Didn't realize this would be in this. I really just glanced to make sure that the article was there. I did not look at this before we are looking at it now. So I had no idea that this article was in here. It says, in Texas, a policeman and an assassin are laid to rest too. So that is fascinating. 1 hour after the president's casket was lowered into the hallowed ground of Arlington National Cemetery, more than 400 persons crowded into Dallas's Beckley Hills Baptist Church to mourn the other victim of that terrible afternoon, Officer J.D. Tippit, killed by Lee Harvey Oswald while seeking the president's assassin. More than 1,000 people who were denied admittance to the service milled outside the church. So plenty of people, and this is just 20 minutes from me, this little church that they're talking about. It talks about the cemetery where he was buried. And then it says at almost the same time, just 35 miles away at Fort Worth's Rose Hill Cemetery, a cloth-covered wooden box bearing Lee Harvey Oswald's remains was being buried in the sticky red clay of a hastily dug grave. Even though plans had been kept secret, the Oswald coffin was surrounded by uniformed police, and plainclothesmen were posted on the cemetery's borders, admitting only reporters that were bearing special passes. The U.S. Secret Service had assured Miller's funeral home that arrangements would be made for funeral costs, which were estimated at $500. There were no frills. The Oswald family, then, as before the shooting, had almost no money. Mrs. Tippit here mourning in this photo. And then we have Mrs. Oswald and her babies here in this one with I believe this is Marguerite Oswald. His mother is holding the baby. It says Oswald's wife Marina holds daughter June Lee while his brother Robert speaks to a federal officer. So this here in the front turned around must be Oswald's brother. This is his wife Marina. There are plenty of interviews with her available on YouTube. There are interviews at the time where she affirms that she thought he was the killer. And then there's more recent interviews where she has given indication that she actually changed her perspective. And then she quit giving interviews altogether because she didn't feel she had been listened to. It says, hurriedly, the assassin's coffin is covered over. So we have this brooding scene in the Fort Worth graveyard. Grave diggers worked frantically, almost furtively, to fill the grave as a few reporters and the spectators watched. Then the light bulldozer moved in to help. We don't want to take any chances, explained the police chief. We don't want this grave bothered. So there is into nagging rumors, the 6 critical seconds. So this here is a page dedicated to discovering the facts about the assassination. and it specifically highlights quotes from certain people. I would say without any doubt, he is the killer. That's Dallas District Attorney Wade. It has little headlines, which I will read to you. I'm not going to read to you any more of it, but it says, was it really Oswald who shot the president? That's one. Had authorities been watching Oswald? Did Oswald have help? How did Ruby get to him? Were the security preparations for the visit adequate? So those are the questions that they were thinking through and life was giving the answers to. I'll have to read through that and see if there's anything interesting. That sounds very fascinating. I just want to say the reason that I'm doing this is because I think it's really important to think through history and see it as it was at the time. One of the things that the book that we're going through does for us is it consolidates many different stories, and that's helpful. It really is helpful to see all of those stories in quick succession. I think it helps us to make connections between them and see the similarities and how so many of the things that one brother did are then reflected in the way the next brother treats his wife and so on. We get the sorrow and expressions of sorrow from around the world. So Berlin lit torches, Milan lowered their flags, London, the Union Jack went to half-mast. It shows Frenchmen and actresses mourning in Notre Dame and on the streets, the Pope and Italy's president weeping in solidarity with Americans in their mourning. So that's very kind. Life magazine is showing the way the world is weeping. Oh, it shows the Russian response. Nikita Khrushchev, who said, no, this cannot be true. That was his response. Then Johnson, is he a good man like Kennedy? That's a question. That's a good question. One we might read about sometime. Finally, the last page. Oh, it says, at the cathedral on his 3rd birthday, John Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. faces his father's coffin and salutes exactly as he had learned to do all the times he had watched his real soldiers salute his father. And there we have that. Well, that takes us back to the very first episode of our journey. Just thinking about little JFK Jr. in that moment. Well, let's look at these photos and then we will be done. This book was like a commemorative book that people could purchase. And I'd like to go through it more carefully. It gives a lot of context for the start of that day. But they were there Friday, November 22nd, 1963. It shows the crowds just outreaching. One of the things that was so remarkable that day, they had expected people to not be excited about meeting them, and Jackie was just thrilled and overjoyed with the way that the crowds were so welcoming. They had actually been told that Dallas was a very ugly place and would not be welcoming to them, which in hindsight, perhaps they should have listened to. But here she is at the beginning of the day in this beautiful dress with her pillbox hat, greeting people, having received the red roses. And she just looks so delighted. Look at her. She had received the red roses that would later be, as she put it, the seat of the car would be covered in red roses and blood. It shows them in the car going. It was a bigger crowd than anyone had anticipated. Photographer James Altkins took this historic photograph just seconds after an assassin fired the shots that killed President Kennedy. The president's left arm had just jerked up convulsively. Mrs. Kennedy's gloved hands reaches out in support. So his hand is up like this, and she's reaching out. I'll try to see if y'all can see that scene right here. We see him reaching up and her reaching out. This is Clint Hill, which was Mrs. Kennedy's Secret Service agent. He was the only one to run up and get on the back of the car. She had started to climb onto the back of the car and he pushed her back. Here she is later that day, and then we have his coffin lying guarded. Well-wishers coming in. This would be Truman and Eisenhower. And then we have John Jr. We have this photo, which we saw in the magazine, something similar. And then this is him walking toward the coffin there. Again, we have the horse-drawn carriages that she had thought up. She wanted everything to be sleek and have pageantry and be lovely. And so she led out the funeral procession despite the warnings from the Secret Service agents. They thought that she needed to be better protected. But she decided, nope, that's what I'm going to do. And then Bobby is there behind her walking. And then we have the portrait of John F. Kennedy, portrait of Jackie. We have the crowd's grief. I think it's fascinating. We still do this today, even now. Even in our current state of affairs. I noticed after 9/11, we all talked about it, that everyone was softer and quieter to one another after that day. But I thought the same was true, even in our ugly political climate. When the assassin went after President Trump in June, there was a solid week where everyone kind of laid off and everyone was a bit gentler. It only lasted a week, but we do still have that inbuilt softness toward one another that breaks cultural barriers, political barriers, language barriers, that we all know grief is a time that we slow down. Now then we get this. We get Jack Ruby lunging toward Lee Harvey Oswald there in the police station. And we have Lee Harvey Oswald's response to that. We get that on live television with photographers on the scene, so we have it so documented what happened. We know exactly what happened to Lee Harvey Oswald. We have the grieving Jackie with Ted on one side and Bobby on the other, and her children there, Caroline and John. We have Bobby leading her by the hand there to the gravesite, and she just looks so panicked and sorrowful here. You can just feel the no, not yet. Her face looks so grief-stricken. I did have an eternal flame, which Jackie is the one who thought up, that's kept there at his gravesite. Her paying her tribute there. She's bowing here. And you know, for all that we, and then here it has LBJ taking the lead. For all that we know about the relationship between Jackie and Jack, and even for the way we can say, boy, she really created a mythical figure and something that he didn't actually live up to. And that's all fine. I think those are fair observations, but I also think what a kind tribute she was able to pay him in her grief and make sure that things were the way she wanted. I think in a way that was almost her way of not giving herself any additional grief moving forward, if that makes sense. Nothing else to regret, nothing else to mourn that she didn't take the opportunity. Instead, she did a beautiful job. She properly mourned, she paid tribute, she had her children pay tribute, and she did her very best to make it beautiful and honorable. And there's something to be said for that in a big moment of life, to have had that much composure that you could do that. So again, you guys tell me what you think. I love coming across these old historical documents. It's amazing that we still have access to these, and that it is possible to walk down the street to an antique shop and find such good history at our fingertips. And I'm just glad to own these. Honestly, I never imagined wanting to own them, but now I want to go back and read that article about the questions about the assassination, because that may lead to some future books that we'll do. But yeah, I'd love to hear from you guys. Did you enjoy this? What did you notice? What did you appreciate seeing? Have a great day. Bye.